Hey, it's your favorite time of the week. So previously on Worlds Asunder.
I guess, but the idea is you're the bad dungeon building something, and that's what Dungeon Core really is. And the point of view is this person learning to use their powers, learning to build an engine, and eventually becoming, the heart of an entire country or economy or something like that. That's basically untouchable.
That's super cool. I just added a bunch of stuff to my TV.
As storytellers, we want to capture the hearts, minds, and imaginations of our readers, mainly through our expertly crafted worlds.
Creating new worlds in any genre might seem like a daunting task, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every story.
Welcome, weary writers, to Worlds Asunder, a world-building and writer's life podcast.
My co-host is David Shadoin, better known as Shady. It's not just a descriptor, it's also his moniker.
And she's H.Y. Grigger, or you can call her Haley, your friendly post-apocalyptic wasteland elf.
Together, we've got enough published to fill a small shelf, but why should you listen to us? Because we called in some favors.
Every other week, we bring you the best and brightest to give you the tips and tricks on world building and character building like the pros. So, open up your ear holes.
Get out your pen and paper.
And get ready for us to tear Worlds Asunder. We've got more of John and Shami Stovall coming at you with Gotta Get Stronger, Part 2. Their power level's over 9,000.
Just to kind of, so we've talked a little bit about kind of where you guys start and how you build out from there. And I'm going to use this term knowing full well that I'm probably going to get crucified because I'm pretty sure this term encompasses a lot more than just progression fantasy and LitRPG. But how did you guys get into writing game lit?
Gamelit is almost its own subset of what we're talking about, because Gamelit usually doesn't include numbers, but somehow does retain a lot of the LitRPG, this is a video game aspect of what's going on. Gamelit is usually softer core LitRPG, people who don't want to use numbers, but still want like a system apocalypse, where a system comes to a world and now we all have magical powers based off of a system that kind of feels like a video game. And I don't think John, if you just say that LitRPG is game lit, then yeah, John writes game lit. But I wouldn't have said that either of us were really game lit authors.
Yeah, and that term's changed, at least like in as far as I know too, because game lit was originally literature based on games, right? When you essentially reverse engineered from a game and you wrote stories into it, Halo being one of the things that comes to mind. But it's funny because like I've heard it tossed around kind of like what you were saying, where it's its own subgenre, and I've heard people use it where it just encompasses all of it. So really, I guess then we'll stick with the terms we've already used. How did you guys decide that you were going to get into progression fantasy? Because I know, Shami, you have a backlog of fantasy historical fiction and some sci-fi stuff out there as well.
Oh yeah, I did author mode on hard mode. I did literally everything they tell you not to do, which is write in every genre that I felt like I wanted to write in. Like most of the time they're like, hey, just stick to one genre, just write the same type of book over and over and over again. I just really like to write a whole lot of bullshit. You know what I'm saying? I really like sci-fi. I really like urban fantasy. I like historical fantasy. I like progression fantasy. I like LitRPG. I've just decided to write in all the genres, stupidly. But it's just because I like them. I like progression fantasy. I like video game style stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like ever escalating fights, the series, the book. That kind of stuff amuses me. I was hardcore into Dragon Ball Z when I was younger. Like, I would wake up early Saturday morning to get that shit straight into my veins. Okay, I can't stop myself from the super hype intense moments when they're like, it's over 9,000, and I'm like, oh my god, it's over 9,000. Can't wait to see what happens here. Even when they have 20 episodes to go over 2 minutes of a planet exploding, I'm here for all 20 episodes. And I'm like, wow, how are they going to get out of this? So that's just my jam, I guess. Like, this isn't like, oh man, maybe I should get into this genre because it's hip to the jive. It's more like that was just a passion. I also really like Pokemon, and I constantly, kind of talk about my series as being inspired from Pokemon. But any monster rancher, monster catching, monster taming, monster fighting bullshit, I have 100% played and love. Like, again, it's just a deep-seated passion. I can't stop thinking about Digimon. Okay, I can't stop thinking about Pokemon. I even love really obscure, random monster catching games like Azure Dreams or Cassette Beasts. And these things are like, how many people have played that? Like 20? You know what I'm saying? So it was just a passion, just a diehard passion. There was nothing really more about it.
It's sort of the opposite for me. I guess mine's a little more cowardly. Shami was being an author for 6 or 7 years before I even tried, basically. And how I got into it was a little bit weirder. But part of it also was Dungeon Core is usually written by dungeon masters. A lot of LitRPG is. I've been running Dungeons and Dragons style games since I was 10 years old. Like, that was the first time I actually ran a campaign. I've built 2 entire systems basically from scratch with more than 1,000 pages of materials in each one, including extraordinarily deep systems. And every time I read like good works like Robert A. Heinlein or Shami or something like that, I basically thought I could never do this. And so I never really tried because I just felt like it was outside of my capacity. And I don't even necessarily think I'm wrong, even at this point, having done a bunch of the books. But when I first read Dungeon Core, and I say this like with love, Shami will tell you I basically read a Dungeon Core book like twice a day for like months in a row. And I would, sometimes our pillow talk would be me asking her, like, what kind of dungeon would you be under X, Y, or Z circumstances? I'm not joking. Like, I have not woken her up, but stopped her from going to bed more than once to say things like, if you had to use an elemental type to be a dungeon, what kind of dungeon would you be? Like that sort of question. But Dungeon Core is mostly written terribly. Okay. Not that the story is terrible, and usually the world building is absolutely fantastic, but the writing itself is usually extremely bad. It's a lot of dungeon masters that just decided they were going to poop a book out. A lot of LitRPG guys that will start there, but then eventually go on to quote real books, if you know what I'm saying. And what really convinced me that I could write was reading some of these books that were terribly written and watching these guys make money. And I was like, I might not be able to write like Shami writes, but I can write like this for sure. And I got a lot of ideas in my head for this Dungeon Core stuff. Like I could come up with some cool dungeons. So I guess, like I said, it's almost like the coward way where I was, but I got into it.
It was strategic.
Yeah, but again, not even really strategic, just sort of like, and it was weird. I only got like getting here was one of those like freak chance things for me because I only even picked up Kindle because Shami was doing stuff and I like to watch numbers go burr. And I just wanted to see her, how she was doing and what her numbers were changing. But because I had Kindle, I like started looking for my old books. And then I was at like a friend's birthday party and her brother was bored and I was bored and we ended up talking and he was like, you got to try this book out. And I was like, sure. And that was Cradle. And I read all those and I was like, damn, that's a really good book. And the also bots were like, you should try The Land, which is the first LitRPG I ever read and one of the first LitRPGs ever written. And then the also bots of that were like, you should try this Divine Dungeon series. And that's when I found Dungeon Core and I was just beyond hooked. And again, reading Divine Dungeon, it's not like the best written book, but it's still written well. But once you start getting into the weeds of Dungeon Core, man, there are some people that cannot string together 2 sentences correctly, and I'm still having fun reading their book, like loving it like nothing, and just enjoying myself like crazy, even though it's the most terribly written schlop you've ever seen, and I'm still loving it. And that's when I was like, maybe I can do this too. I can write terrible schlop. So,
Or just a good story, right? Which I think is the heart of it. We were at Superstars writing seminars just 2 weeks ago, and James Hunter taught a class on like the 5 pillars of indie publishing, I think is what the class was called. But one of the things that he talked about was how like your prose doesn't have to be gorgeous. What you need to do is be really good at telling a story that people are invested in, and that he would rather work with a good storyteller than like a really beautiful, like purple prosy kind of writer any day, because in the end, like that's what people are turning to books for, right? So I think that's a great point.
Well, I think the storytelling is easier for me, and I think that's why I've been at least medium successful, is because I am a dungeon master since I was like 10 years old. I'm used to putting together stories, but I have very mediocre prose. That is, in fact, my weakness as an author. And I've been doing my best to work on that, but still certainly not amazing. But yeah, I do think LitRPG is also much more forgiving of mediocre prose. Quite frankly, I think the audience is much more forgiving of it. They want a good story, a good system, a good world. And if you have those things, they're willing to forgive you telling it to them in, repeating the same word 9 times in a paragraph. So.
Yeah, I was
Would
going
you
to
guys
say
say
your
that-
reviews say otherwise. But
would
No.
you guys say that your readers are genre locked, more or less?
Mine are, not Shami's.
Yeah, I have people who read my entire catalog, and my entire catalog goes from hard science fiction like space opera to lit RPG. You know what I'm saying? But they are rarer. Most people stick to genres that they really, really like because, I mean, let's face it, books are a form of entertainment, and people today have so many options for entertainment. You could watch a streaming show, you could watch a movie. There's audiobooks, there's video games, there's social media. If you want to entertain yourself, there's an endless plethora of entertainment. And so a lot of people just kind of want to go for the stuff that they know is going to entertain them because they want that entertainment hit right now. And so I feel like a lot of people do have a genre that they gravitate towards and just read because they're like, this is going to do it for me. I can't wait to read about that dungeon who makes a new room and has adventurers come in because that fucking does it for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so they go and pick up another dungeon core. So I don't even begrudge them for that. But I wouldn't say my readers were genre locked just because I write too many genres.
But I write in an extremely niche genre. I mean, that's really I do write more standard lit RPG like Elf Empire and stuff like that, and that is a little less genre locked. But there's only about 7,000 to 10,000 Dungeon Core readers in the entire world, probably, and it's still enough that for about 4 to 5 years it was able to sustain 5 to 6 authors permanently, just making a full-time living. One of them doing extremely well full-time living, and another one was a hybrid but made an extremely large amount of money off of it as well. So they're genre locked, but they're insanely hardcore. So
So then, what separates, we've talked a bit about the dungeon core aspect of it, like how unique it is compared to even other lit RPG stuff. But what separates lit RPG and progression fantasy from traditional fantasy when it comes down to world building? Is it just the leveling, or do you have to approach all of it with just a different mindset because of that?
Well, in traditional fantasy, you don't usually end the book by fighting God, right? And in traditional fantasy, I feel like if there are hierarchies or tiers of people, it's usually used a little bit more as like a rigid set. So you could have a king and knights and advisors, and there are a couple people who are fighting to become king, but it's only like 5 dudes, and it's not like the random farm boy wakes up and is like, you know what, I'm going to be king, and I'm going to fight every motherfucker that wants to be king until I'm king via pure brute force, and then I'm just going to be king. Like, that's not how normal fantasy works. You know what I'm saying? Normal fantasy usually works a little bit more in the world building that's not always, but set to kind of like historically accurate kind of rules for how hierarchy works. A lot of the times in a progression fantasy novel, might equals right. If you're just stronger, you're the one in charge. And it's because you're so much stronger. And I mean that not like, oh man, knights know how to wield swords, so obviously they're in charge of the squires who don't know how to wield swords. I mean, like, if you have read Cradle, like Haley, you said you read Cradle, like the people who are the higher tiers of their cultivation can do outrageously crazy things as compared to the like little tiers, right? For example, in my Arcanist books, like a normal Arcanist with a normal mystical creature can control fire, or maybe he can do a little bit of things with the weather. But the god creatures can rearrange all the terrain on a continent. You know, like they can make mountains disappear, make new mountains, live in lava. You know what I'm saying? Like power levels that are far beyond a normal dude. So clearly they're the ones in charge, because what are you going to do? What are you going to do to stop them? You know, like that kind of mentality. So I feel like a lot of the times in progression fantasy worlds, a lot of the world building is based off of might equals right. And usually might is just. Like that's also a thing, like built into the world. Like if there isn't justice happening, you need to physically beat it. You know what I'm saying? You need to physically beat its ass, because that doesn't need to be there. And again, that doesn't normally happen, I think, in a normal fantasy setting. There are usually a lot of like, everybody's gray, a whole bunch of people are corrupt, you never know what's going on. Littlefinger is also here and he's doing something evil. Maybe he's a good guy, maybe he's not a good guy. I feel like a lot of the time in progression fantasy, I mean, if you said you watch Naruto and Dragon Ball Z, what happens is bad guy shows up and he's using his powers in a bad way and he's hurting people, and then Naruto's like, you can't do that, that's being mean, and then he fucking punches him in the throat, and then that guy's not being mean no more. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's also where a lot of the wish fulfillment comes from, because a lot of the times it's frustrating to be a normal human being, like listening to the news and being like, and then you flip open the news and there's another rapist, or there's another murderer, or there's another congressman who stole $20 million of taxpayer money, and you're like, I wish I could do something about this. You know what I'm saying? I wish I could stop murderers and rapists and all these people who think they can get away with doing evil things. And if I just happen to have the powers of Superman, maybe I could fly around vigilante style and just punch everybody in the face who wasn't doing right. Now you might think to yourself, well, that's fucking dystopian. We shouldn't have people who just, whatever powers, get to decide what's going on. But a lot of the time in progression fantasy, the good guys are using their powers goodly, quote unquote. And even if you're like, well, that's overstepping their authority, it's okay. It's couched in the, you know, Superman being a good guy who saves the day. So you don't think too hard about the, I guess, weirdly authoritarian ness that would come from that. You know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, so I feel like the world building is just different because it's based a little bit more around might.
I also think it's softer in normal fantasy. I think the rules of power are extremely well defined in most progression fantasy, and extraordinarily well defined in LitRPG. Shami and I have had many talks about Studio Ghibli. She loves it, I hate it.
I'm with Shami on this one.
Yeah, but the reason is because I don't like fairy tale-esque stories where magic just happens, virtue determines things. I like hard magic systems, you know? Traditional fantasy has a lot of soft magic. King Arthur gets the sword from the Lady in the Lake because he's a good guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, the kingdom falls because too many people became corrupt. Not because they were making bad decisions that caused an economic downturn, for example. And I think traditional fantasy relies a lot more on this sort of subtle stuff. And I don't think there's a lot of subtlety in any of the rules of progression fantasy, and especially LitRPG, which, obviously if it's a might makes right world, there's going to be less subtlety to start with. But even the world building lacks subtlety, and I don't mean that negatively. It can be extraordinarily complex, deep, and interesting. The land is sort of famous. It's for having one of the most complete world building feels of like this incredibly deep world that's existed for hundreds of thousands of years. Tons of things happening. It's got maps, geography, all that stuff, but there's nothing subtle about it. It's very much, this was a kingdom that was shattered by this crazy event that happened with all these magical powers. Here's why it's what's shattered. Here's what's left here. That sort of thing. It's not like, oh, and then the forests, we don't really know where it came from, and it's got dark magic, but we don't know what type, and a pure heart will fix it. It's not like that. It's like, well, you needed a level 11 fire spell to break this wall of magic. So I think it's very much hard magic and very much less sort of fairy tale soft magic virtue type stuff.
Well, I think you've kind of hit on it there, though. But one of the questions we've written up was kind of what aspects separate these genres from like fantasy novels with progression elements, like Harry Potter, like the Codex Alera from Jim Butcher. What even separates it from like Dragon Ball Z and Naruto?
Well, I'm with Shami that Naruto and Dragon Ball Z are very clear precursors to the progression fantasy genre. I think they outline. I mean, Dragon Ball Z is so hardcore, just a flat out straight standard progression fantasy. It's hard to overstate. Naruto's a little more subtle, but it's still very clearly in that ballpark. Things like Harry Potter, though, I mean, if you think about it, Harry Potter has a lot of that, like, even though it has the, a magic system and they use wands and they have rules and yada yada, it has a lot of that soft stuff. Your mother's love got into the skin, solves the first book. Which wand defeated what wand solves the seventh book. Like, the wand knows who the master was at the time and who defeated who. It has a soul and it thinks about things. It's not like power levels. It's just, it's like, who was the boss when this happened? And like, oh, even though this person defeated that person, since that other person was defeated by this person, you know what I mean? Like, it's weirdly subtle. He has to let himself be killed so that the wand doesn't think it's been defeated, but if he accepts his defeat, it's not really a defeat. I mean, there's just a lot of really, it's still very much this soft magic, virtue, fairy tale. Harry Potter plays very much into those tropes. I guess, Shami said might makes right. In Harry Potter, right makes might. Like, it's an absolutely reversed thing. They say all the time, like Dumbledore always says that that Voldemort, of the things that really matter, like love and children's stories and all that, he knows nothing, and that's what defeats him. Like, that's very much in that genre. Now, at some points, it's a little more of a hard system, and yes, they progress and they get better, but it's very, very much, right makes might, not the opposite.
If Harry Potter was a progression fantasy, the moment that Dolores Umbridge showed up and started hurting him, he would have punched her in the throat. Okay, he would have used his magic and he would have fucking defeated her, and he would have thrown her from Hogwarts, and he would have said, "Get the hell out of here." You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how progression fantasy rolls. If bad guys be doing bad things, you don't sit around and quietly suffer them because the rules of the academy. You just handle that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how progression fantasy usually handles that might equals right. I think John's totally correct. Harry Potter leans more on the softer side of magic with, your mother's love protecting you from evil Voldemort. You know what I'm saying? In progression fantasy, people don't want to see arbitrary magic that just came out of nowhere, even if it sounds nice. Like, it's But Harry Potter is like a middle grade book in all seriousness. So it's okay in a middle grade book to be like, wow, his mom loved him so much that she protected him even though she's dead. And you're like, oh, that's nice. In a progression fantasy, people don't want to see that. People want to see Harry defeated that gauntlet of trials because he punched Cerberus in the face, and then he solved all the puzzles himself. He grabbed his dick, and then he walked into the next room, and there was evil Quirrell. And because he's just so good at fucking studying magic, he beat Quirrell in a duel. And then, he got Voldemort out of his body, and he told him to go fuck himself. Okay, and you might laugh and be like, "Shami, that's over the top." That's the progression fantasy. That's what we want to see, okay? I would be there. I would read that book, guys. I would be there reading that book, and I'd be like, yeah, fuck that guy. That's what he deserved for showing up and trying to hurt a bunch of children. And it's almost an escapism to think to yourself, what if I just worked hard enough and I had enough magical skill that I could literally stop all the bad people from doing bad things that were in my nearby vicinity? Okay, like that's where the fun comes from it. You do want to see Goku show up and fucking punch Frieza. You know what I'm saying? I do want to see Harry Potter just roll into the room and be like, not today, Voldemort, and then just punch that guy. Now, it can be a hard fought battle. Like, it doesn't have to be so one-sided that Harry Potter backhands him. You know what I'm saying? But I do want to see the whole reason that I gathered all this power, the whole reason that I leveled up, the whole reason that I studied the magic was so that I could use it in this one moment to stop you from being a bad guy.
Sure. John said something that made me think about it. And this could be a tangent on the Harry Potter series, essentially. But when he gets told, he's like, yeah, the wand chooses the wizard, Harry. I just realized how much that, like, and I hope all the new authors realize how much foreshadowing went into essentially book 7 and then the final bit of, like, what you were talking about, where this wand was actually defeated by this person, and so it recognizes this particular master, that kind of thing. Like, that's, that is kind of the step there that was taken right, in the first, what was it, 5 chapters, book 1.
Yeah, I legitimately think that Harry Potter is one of the best written series ever. I recognize its genius. I understand why it's basically the most popular non-religious text in existence. I didn't particularly care for book 1 or 2 myself, just because it was a little too YA for my taste. But I've actually read books 3 through 7 multiple times. I'm in no way denigrating it, but it is a very different tale than a.
It can't be quantified.
Yeah, nothing can be quantified, and it has a lot to do with fuzzier things, magic as the inexplicable as opposed to magic as an alternative power source. Progression fantasy very much relies on magic as an alternative power source. It is not inexplicable basically ever. You understand how it works. Whether it's a LitRPG or not is irrelevant. You understand how the magic works. You understand how to get better. You understand how to use it. And, Shami and I are kind of joking at the expense of progression fantasy because we're talking smack about walking into the room, grabbing your dick, and then beating everybody to death with it, which certain degree of truth to that. But, most of the stories, Elf Empire especially, most of the fights are solved by being extremely clever. And cleverness is part of it in the series. Like, that's part of why you can overcome, is because you're just cleverer than everybody else and you use your powers better. Like, maybe you're fighting a guy 1 tier above you who should be able to beat you, but you're just like super cool and smart and you know how to use your powers better. So I'm not saying it's not, it's very intellectual in many cases. It's definitely adult, but at the end of the day, Shami's absolutely right. It's about getting your power to the point where you can defeat the people that are doing bad things by the sheer force of your determination, will, and training.
Like the Cradle series, it's like basically predicated off of Lyndon's village is going to be unfairly destroyed. And so he needs to get a whole bunch of power so that he can make sure it's not unfairly destroyed. Like that's literally, it's literally the heart core of most progression fantasy, is that for some reason we need to get more power because there are bad guys with higher power and we need to defeat those bad guys. Okay, in Dragon Ball Z, that's the story ad nauseum. Some Saiyans showed up to the planet and they're trying to kidnap Goku's kid, and we got to beat him down. Oh no! Even more powerful Saiyans are about to show up to Earth, and so we got to power up in order to fight those guys too. Oh no! Their boss is even more powerful than they were. I guess we got to do some more training so that we can beat those guys. Like, that is the heart of progression fantasy right there.
And for the record, they do fight God. they reach the point where they fight God. It's just at its heart, it is the ultimate progression fantasy.
Well, that's it. You've reached the end of another episode of Worlds Asunder. This time with John and Shami discussing the differences between LitRPG, game lit, progression fantasy, and your bog standard fantasy adventures. We hope you enjoyed all of our references to anime and manga and some of the newer books that really kind of led into progression fantasy and your academy style series, as well as some of our revelations on how certain things actually got laid out. As always, you can catch us in our show notes. Go hit us up there, follow us on any of our social medias, buy our books. We'd really appreciate that. Next time, in about 2 weeks, we'll be Gotta Get Stronger Part 3 with John and Shami, the finale. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Let us know how we're doing. And thanks for helping us tear the worlds asunder. We'll see you next time.